for the brave American women who wear the uniform of the United States of America. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Indiana.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, I've come to the floor many times to, over the past several months, to outline the problems that we're facing with the rollout of the Obamacare law, the problems that my constituents are facing and people all across the country. And while it's important to discuss the generic and macro effects of this law, and we see it unrolling before us every day, it's also important to understand what the direct effects are to people at a personal level. Now, I traveled last week during our break time throughout Indiana and talked to a number of people. Many of them just came up to me voluntarily to tell me what the effect to them was over this confusing, complex, and seemingly intractable, from an understanding standpoint, of Obamacare. And so let me read just a couple, for the record, just a couple of the statements that were made to me. An email that I received from Daniel in Elkhart, Indiana, I think summarizes the experiences of literally hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers and millions of Americans that they're having with the website alone. He wrote, and I quote, "I have tried for 2 weeks to apply through the marketplace only to electronically sign my application, but then it was kicked back to my profile page. This is the most bizarre system I have ever experienced. If a company put a business website together like this, they would be out of business." Anthony in Indianapolis shared similar concerns. He said, "I have been unable to get through the health care government website. My wife must notify her insurance company by November 15 if she will keep her existing plan. I understand there are problems with the website." I think we all understand that at this point. "I heard the President say you could sign up in person or on the phone or on paper, but the 2 navigators I called to help me through this said that until the website works, they can't help. I called the 1-800 number, but the healthcare.gov reps said his computer was frozen up and he could not give me any help. I hear about the tech surge, how there will be a few rough spots," another understatement, few rough spots, "and how they will be fixed. Senator, if you listen to the news, the problems with the system are much deeper than the President let on in his Tuesday address. I need help, and I don't think the system will be in operation in time for me to make an informed decision." These are 2 statements from only 2 of the many, many Hoosiers who have described similar problems to me, which is probably why, when asked about the Obamacare website, an experienced online and database programmer told CBS News, and I quote, "I would be ashamed and embarrassed if my organization delivered something like that." Now, we know that this law passed the Senate on Christmas Eve Day, 2009, without any bipartisan support. One party alone put this law into place. And we now know that over $400 million have been spent to create a website so Americans who are mandated to accept this Obamacare law can go and sign up for it. We know that nearly 4 years of notice has been in place to get just the website up. And this rollout, as one Democrat senator said over the weekend, has been a disaster. Now, if the administration, after 4 years of effort, nearly 4 years of effort, and over $400 million can't get the website right, how in the world can anyone believe that the federal government can manage this monstrous and dysfunctional law that has been imposed upon the American people? Now, despite the website's numerous glitches and many other implementation problems, despite this, the administration still insists on fining taxpayers if they don't sign up and purchase Obamacare under the compliant policies. What an irony. You need to sign up or you're going to get fined. But the website is so dysfunctional you can't sign up, but you're still going to get fined. That is mind-boggling, head-scratching, and simply unacceptable. Now, Madam President, we know that there's been numerous attempts to repeal this law, replace it with something far more acceptable, affordable, and implementable. We now know that the defund effort that resulted in the shutdown failed to gain the necessary votes to achieve that goal. But I think the responsible thing to do, and in September I introduced a bill to delay the rollout of the Obamacare mandates for a year. And as the problems with the health care law pile up, I'm going to continue to push for this delay. The delay makes sense because the program is simply dysfunctional and it's not going to be implemented. Bottom line, though, is I want this delay so that the American people have another chance to learn what is in this law, to evaluate as to whether or not they want this to go forward as the health care law of the United States, or whether they think a viable alternative that we have the responsibility to put forward, and many of us have advocated components of that, whether or not that alternative is the better way to go. Now, I know it's been said by the President and others that in 2012 the public went to the polls to vote for the presidential election, and therefore that vote certified that the American people would support and wanted the Obamacare law. First of all, that wasn't the primary, it was one of the issues that was a determinative factor in the outcome of that election, but not nearly the factor. Because most Americans at that point still had not had the opportunity or the experience that they're having now in finding out exactly just how this law works and does not work, finding out all the dysfunction, and learning that all of those campaign promises made, or promises made when the law was passed, have simply been broken. You can keep the insurance policy that you have now, no problem. It won't cost a penny more, no problem. On and on it goes. Keep the doctor that you want. Americans are finding out that none of this is true. Premiums will not rise. Premiums are rising for many, many Americans. This will be easy. Go to a website, sign up, punch in, put your name in, you're on board, everything's great. None of this has worked. So why not delay this process? Not just to learn more about what's here, but to primarily give the American people another opportunity to vote with their feet, to walk into the polling booth, as this being the issue that they're voting on, and a number of members will have to stand up and either explain why they supported this, why they didn't support it. Americans will have a choice. We'll put alternatives in front of them. And so that's the purpose of the delay for a year. One, because it's dysfunctional. Two, because Americans deserve a second chance to express their opinions on this bill. This has already been passed by the House of Representatives. My colleague, Representative Todd Young of Indiana, sponsored that. It gained bipartisan support, 22 Democrats. House Democrats recognized the need to give Americans the same relief from Obamacare that businesses are receiving. So codifying the employer delay on the employer mandate, which the President has proposed and put into practice, and doing that for the individuals and families that don't fall under the employer category only is a matter of fairness. And that also is something that has to be addressed. Recently, several Senate Democrats have come out in support of delaying parts or all of the President's health care law as well. So I think the opportunity here is before us to put the brakes on trying to jam through something that simply is dysfunctional and not working. And secondly, to give the American people the opportunity to go back to the polls and decide whether or not this is the way they want their health care programs to go forward. We've had nothing but broken promises. We're learning about how difficult it is for the government to manage even the first step, let alone the 1/6 of the economy that deals with our health care. This is important for all Americans, and I'm urging my colleagues to support this effort to give the American people another chance to look at a more viable and a more affordable alternative. And with that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Colorado.
Madam President, let me start with the unanimous consent request. I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I'd ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I also ask unanimous consent that I could address the Senate for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words today in support of my fellow Coloradan, Katherine Archuleta, and her nomination to be the Director of the Office of Personnel Management. I've known her for years, and I have tremendous respect for her. She's given much of her life to public service, and her dedication to her communities, her state, and her country is a testament to her character. And I'm very confident that she'll be a steady hand at the helm of OPM, and I want to urge all my colleagues to support her confirmation. Now, not everyone watching may be familiar with the Office of Personnel Management, but it's an important agency. Let me talk about Colorado in that context. Thousands of federal employees in Colorado, including our state in the wake of September's tragic flooding, count on OPM. It's a critical part of the integrity and strength of the entire federal workforce. It's responsible for, among so many other duties, employee recruitment and retention, and for managing federal benefit and retirement programs. We all expect federal agencies and departments to function effectively and efficiently for our constituents. And as someone who ran a nonprofit in Colorado for 10 years, I know the importance of maintaining a talented and motivated workforce. Strong workforce management leads directly to better work and better service and better outcomes, which is why it's so important to have someone leading OPM who's an advocate for federal employees and also a strong manager with high expectations. That's again why I stand here this morning. I believe Katherine will be this type of leader. She has years of high-level management experience. She's sharp, she's hardworking, and she's dedicated to the goal of making government work as effectively and efficiently as possible. She has an impressive resume, as I noted at her hearing when I had the opportunity to introduce her. She has local and state-level experience serving senior roles in 2 Denver mayoral administrations, as well as extensive experience here in Washington, serving as the Chief of Staff to former U.S. Secretary of Transportation Federico Pena in the 1990s, and more recently to U.S. Secretary of Labor Hilda Solis. In between her years of public service here in Denver and then also in Washington, Katherine consulted with charities, nonprofits, cities, regional governments, and businesses to help them pursue community development, workplace diversity, and crisis management strategies. If you look for a common thread, Mr. President, throughout Katherine's career, it's her capacity, her talent to work with individuals and organizations, identify priorities, and then notably to create the conditions for successful implementation of these priorities. That's what we need at the helm of OPM. It's what Americans expect and demand. So as you look at Katherine's career, she has demonstrated an ability to lead, to motivate, and to work constructively with a diverse range of people and personalities. She's a true Westerner. She has personal integrity. She has a strong sense of right and wrong, and she has obvious pride in the work that she does. That makes her a top-notch choice to lead our federal workforce. So, Mr. President, for all those reasons, I'm honored to speak in support of Katherine Archuleta's nomination and her confirmation, we hope, today, and I hope that we'll act quickly to confirm her nomination. She's eminently qualified for this position, and she deserves an up or down vote as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
All time has expired. The question is on the Estevez nomination. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Katherine Archuleta of Colorado to be Director of the Office of Personnel Management, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Katherine Archuleta of Colorado to be Director of the Office of Personnel Management shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Chiesa, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker.
Yes.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kane. Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Begich, Casey, Chiesa, Corker, Grassley, Heitkamp, Isaacson, Kane, King, Landrieu, Menendez, Murray, Reed of Rhode Island, Schatz, Shelby, Tester, Udall of Colorado, and Wicker. Mr. Vitter voted in the negative. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Warner. Aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons. Aye. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Franken. Mr. Franken, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mrs. Hagan. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Coates. Aye. Mr. Coates. Aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Mikulski. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mrs. Boxer. Mrs. Boxer, aye. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Coburn, no. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly, aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, no. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch, aye. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, aye. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Flake. Mr. Flake, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote?
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 81, the nays are 18. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Office of Personnel Management, Katherine Archuleta of Colorado to be director.
Pursuant to the provisions of S-Res 15 of the 113th Congress, there will now be up to 8 hours of post-cloture consideration of the nomination, equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise.
The Senate will be in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to speak on this nomination and to oppose it because of the recent actions of the Office of Personnel Management with regard to the Washington exemption from Obamacare. I voted just now against cloture on the nomination, and I will vote against the nomination itself later today because of these very, very serious matters. OPM, the office to which this nominee is nominated and which she would head, has issued an illegal rule that is very offensive, flies in the face of the Obamacare statute language itself. And this nominee is pledged to continue to enforce that illegal rule and illegal policy. Furthermore, OPM has completely stonewalled members, including myself, my colleague Senator Heller, others, regarding how they came to that decision and, importantly, who they talked with, who they emailed with, who they met with in coming to that decision to create this illegal Washington exemption. Mr. President, let me back up a little bit and explain exactly what we're talking about. And really, this story starts several years ago in the Obamacare debate. During the original debate on the Obamacare statute, several conservatives, including myself, pushed an amendment that said every member of Congress, all of our official congressional staff, have to use the same fallback plan as is there for all other Americans. Originally, it was called the public option. Then it became known as the exchanges. No special rules, no special treatment, no special subsidy. And in fact, that's one of the very few battles in that debate we won, because that provision was adopted during the consideration of the Obamacare statute. It was adopted right here in the Senate. And so in the statutory language, as it finally passed into law, is that section. And that section says very clearly, every member of Congress and all of our official congressional staff have to go to the Obamacare exchanges for our health care. The same fallback plan as is there for all other Americans. No special rules or privileges or subsidies or exemptions. We go there. Well, Mr. President, I guess this became an example of what Nancy Pelosi was talking about when she famously said, well, we have to pass the law in order to figure out what's in it. Because the law did pass. It had that specific statutory provision. And then people on Capitol Hill started reading the law. And they came to that section, and a lot of them said, oh, you know what? We can't live with this. We can't have this. We can't be pushed to the same fallback plan as all other Americans. We can't stand for this. And so from that moment on, a furious lobbying campaign and scheming behind the scenes started to avoid that provision fully going into effect, to avoid the pain of that provision, the pain of Obamacare that millions of other Americans are facing as we speak. Meetings happen, leadership meetings happen, member meetings happen, furious scheming behind the scenes, and a lot of lobbying. And ultimately, that lobbying of the Obama administration paid off, because in early August of this year, right after Congress got out of town for the August recess, conveniently right after Congress left the scene of the crime, the Obama administration issued a special rule with no basis in the law, in my opinion, no basis in the Obamacare statute. And this special rule was a special exemption for Congress, a carve-out to take all of the financial sting out of that Obamacare section. And what this special OPM rule is, and again, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, was the agency that came up with this illegal rule after this furious lobbying, after President Obama became personally involved, literally personally participated in the discussions leading to this rule. What this illegal rule does is essentially two things. First of all, the rule says, well, official congressional staff, we don't know who that is. We can't possibly determine who official congressional staff is. So we're going to leave it up to each individual member of Congress to figure out who their official staff are. Well, Mr. President, I would submit that that is just ludicrous on its face. Congressional staff are congressional staff. Official staff are anyone who works for us through the institution of Congress versus outside entities and institutions like our campaign staff. And so leaving it up to every individual member of Congress is contrary to the statute on its face. It's outrageous on its face. But under this OPM rule, that's exactly what they do. So an individual member of Congress can say, well, these 10 people aren't official staff. They're on my staff, but for some magical reason, they're not official for purposes of this mandate. In fact, under this rule, a member can say nobody on my congressional staff is official staff for purposes of this mandate. And we see members doing that as we speak. We see examples of that being reported in the press as we speak, members deciding, well, nobody is official staff. I don't have official staff because it will mean they have to go to the Obamacare exchange and live by the same rules through the same experience as other Americans. That's flat out ridiculous. But that's not the only thing the OPM rule did, Mr. President. It did a second thing, which is perhaps even more outrageous. It said members of Congress and staff who do go to the exchange, they get to take along with them a huge taxpayer-funded subsidy. that no other American at similar income levels enjoys going to the Obamacare exchanges. This is a huge subsidy worth at least $5,000 for individuals and $10,000 or $11,000 for families. And again, no other American at similar income levels is privy to that sort of subsidy. Now, again, Mr. President, I think this part of the OPM rule is flat out illegal. It is not in the Obamacare statute. There was discussion of it. There were drafts that allowed that to happen, but the language that was put in the law did not include that subsidy. It was specifically left out, and in fact, magically transforming what was under previous law, a Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan subsidy, magically transforming that into some Obamacare exchange subsidy, that's contrary to law. That's beyond OPM and the administration's legal authority. But they just did it because they could to bail out Washington, to bail out Congress. Well, this is outrageous and it's illegal. As soon as I heard of this proposed rule in early August, Mr. President, I joined with many colleagues, House and Senate, and I appreciate all of their leadership. And I'm joined by many colleagues in the Senate who I specifically want to acknowledge, who are fighting for this change. Senators Enzi and Heller and Lee, Johnson, Inhofe, Cruz, and Graham. We're also joined by House members, led by Representative Ron DeSantis of Florida. And all of us quickly got together and said, this is illegal and this is wrong, and we have to stop it. And so we came up with language to do just that, to reverse this illegal OPM rule and to make sure that every member of Congress and all of our congressional staff go to the Obamacare exchanges, and we go there just like other Americans go there. No special exemption or special subsidy or special treatment. Now, our fix also expands that to the President, the Vice President, their White House staff, and all of their political appointees, because that is appropriate as well. And so our language says to all those folks, Congress and the administration, you have to get your health care the same way other Americans are in the backup plan and the fallback plan and the so-called exchanges. You go to the exchanges and you get no special treatment, no special exemption, no special subsidy. I think this is really, really important for two reasons. First of all, basic fairness. It should be the first rule of American democracy, that what Washington passes on America, it lives with itself. Washington should have to eat its own cooking. You know, it's like going to a restaurant and hearing that the chef in the kitchen never eats there. Something's wrong with that restaurant. Something's wrong with that picture. And something's wrong with Washington, when Washington exempts itself over and over and over again from eating its own cooking. The second reason this is important is a very practical one, because the sooner we demand that Washington live by exactly the same rules it imposes on America, the sooner Washington will start getting things right on Obamacare, on taxes, on regulation, across the board. And so for that very practical reason, we need to make sure that the same rules apply to Washington the same way they apply to the rest of America. Now, let me come back to OPM, because what we're debating here is the nominee to head the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the bureaucracy that came up with this illegal rule. That nominee is pledged to continue to enforce that illegal rule, to continue to defend that illegal rule. Also, OPM to date has been completely unresponsive. Stonewalling is the more appropriate term. All of my and other members' inquiries about the process they use to come up with this illegal rule. I've written OPM several times. I wrote them immediately after their draft rule was issued. I wrote them very soon after their final rule was issued. And I specifically wrote them demanding all emails and other correspondence and other documentation and information that they had from members of Congress, from leadership, from the administration, with regard to the work and discussion that went into their rule. Other colleagues of ours here in the Senate and also in the House have done the same thing. My distinguished colleague from Nevada, Dean Heller, talked to the then OPM director face-to-face. He asked the OPM director, did you speak with, were you lobbied by members of Congress or the administration about this rule? And that director said, no, absolutely not. It now turns out that that apparently is a lie. According to other sources, there were absolutely discussions, communications, emails and the like between congressional leadership and the administration and OPM. So Dean Heller was lied to face-to-face about this by OPM. I've asked for all of the emails, all of the correspondence, all of the discussions that happened leading up to this rule involving members of Congress, leadership, and also the President and the Vice President and members of their administration. That request for information has been completely stonewalled. So first, OPM caves to intense lobbying from Washington insiders. Second, it caves and issues an illegal rule contrary to the statutory language of Obamacare. And third, it stonewalls regarding the process and the conversations and the emails that led to that illegal rule. Mr. President, we just can't stand for that. And that's precisely why I'm opposing this OPM nomination, why I voted no on cloture, why I will vote no on the nomination. We need answers. We need to reverse this illegal rule. And yes, we need a vote on the Vitter Amendment that the distinguished majority leader and others have blocked out for months now. We need that vote. We need that vote that has been actively blocked out by the majority leader for months. Let's do things right. Let's get that information from OPM. Let's reverse this illegal rule. Let's vote on this important matter. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
John Hoeven, a Republican of North Dakota. He's also a negotiator for the Farm Bill. And I'm just curious about, given the inability of the two sides to come together on this piece of legislation over the past year or 2 years, how do you bridge the differences between the two bills? They are quite different.
Well, that's a challenge, although I have to say, as a member of the Ag Committee in the Senate, You know, we've been working to not only craft the best possible farm bill, but also looking at what the House Ag Committee is doing and saying, okay, we're going to have to reconcile these two. Let's make sure we're anticipating that as we put together the legislation.
What does the Senate bill look like versus the House bill?
We really emphasize crop insurance and enhancing crop insurance in the Senate bill. That's what farmers and ranchers across this country said that's their #1 priority. And so that's really our focus. We strengthen crop insurance, make it work like you would for other business people. On the House side, they continue to focus on the counter-cyclical program. Although they enhance crop insurance, they really focus on the traditional counter-cyclical program. But both of us take out direct payments. But that's the difference in the focus as far as the farm program itself.
And what about food stamps, which also falls under the purview of these two committees?
Well, obviously, that's the biggest challenge we have, right, is reconciling the difference in the food stamp programs between the House and the Senate version. Now, everybody gets focused on the numbers. We make reforms, reduce the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, scoring by $4 billion. They reduce it by $40 billion. So everybody focuses on the numerical difference. The reality, though, is we have to look at the underlying reforms, determine how we compromise on those, and use common sense. In other words, how do we reform the program so we eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse so people who need help still get it? But as the economy strengthens, we hopefully bring people off and create the right incentives to go off so that people don't need food stamps. And that, of course, reduces the cost over time to the federal government.
According to the Associated Press, the House bill cuts $40 billion from the program. That's 5% from the program, and allows states to impose work requirements on able-bodied recipients, and took the program out of their farm bill, passed it separately. What does that mean for negotiations?
Well, then they in essence brought it back because they've passed both now. So we're going to deal with both the nutrition program and the traditional farm bill, if you will, the farm side, in the conference committee. So we'll deal with both. We both made reforms from the standpoint of states not putting in a small match and then triggering the program, which we feel is an important reform to kind of make sure everybody plays fair and plays straight. That provides savings. Both the House and the Senate have that included. So we'll come together on that, I think, easily. Then the challenge is in the work requirement, how do we reconcile the differences between the House and the Senate versions in a way, again, where we create the right incentives to be either finding a job, getting training, going to school, doing community service, whatever. And then if you need assistance, you know, providing that assistance.
So $40 billion in the House bill, $4 billion in the Senate bill. The Tea Party groups, Heritage Action Fund, et cetera, have said the Farm Bill is their next fight. They have their eyes set on that in these negotiations that begin today. So with that, where do you think the number settles at? Is it below $40 billion?
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. Everybody focuses on the number. But remember, this is a CBO score. Congressional Budget Office scores the reforms that you make. I think the way you really get a compromise is you say, hey, what are we trying to accomplish here? We want reforms that are common sense so there isn't abuses of the program. We want to encourage people to work and so they become self-sufficient. But then we want to make sure people who need the help get it. So what we really have to focus on is what's the underlying policy, what are the reforms, what are the work requirements. Let's use common sense, come together, then that should drive the number. And I submit to you, no matter what that number is that CBO says up front, that's not going to be what it actually is over the next 5 years. The actual amount we save over the next 5 years is going to be a function of how we grow this economy and get people back to work. That's the reality. Again, we can't just get hung up on the number. Let's create a good policy that works. Common sense.
Staying on food stamps, here's Brad Plummer's piece from the Washington Post yesterday. He notes that the SNAP program, the food stamp program, costs about $80 billion per year, provides food aid to about 14% of all U.S. households, some 47 million people. Those numbers swelled during the recession. But the food stamp program is set to downsize in the weeks ahead. Separate from your negotiations, there's a big automatic cut scheduled for November 1st as a temporary boost from the 2009 stimulus bill expires. That will trim $5 billion from the federal program, with reports showing that there's an economic benefit to the food stamp program and the recession or the recovery fragile. Is it a good idea for these cuts to go through?
I think it's tough to call them cuts when you look at the growth in food stamps over the last 5-year period. They've grown from roughly $50 billion a year to almost $80 billion a year in terms of what we spend, and the number of recipients has increased dramatically as well. So, look, you're talking about a program that's grown tremendously, and we're making reforms, I think, that really make sense. Saying that people, should be trying to either find a job or be trained for a job or furthering their education as part of getting this assistance, I think makes sense. And in terms of the program we're providing, again, with the growth in the program, we certainly are reaching out and making sure that folks that need the help get it. At the same time, across the country, people want to know that we're eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, and that we're creating the right incentives for people to go to work, get educated, become self-sufficient.
The Wall Street Journal this morning has the headline that in the budget negotiations, separate from what you guys are doing, the House and Senate conferees over there, along with the White House, are looking at farm subsidies as a way to ease sequestration. They're eyeing those programs. Do you know what programs they're eyeing, and how do you feel about that?
I've said all along, as we work towards a budget deal and even a debt ceiling deal, the Farm Bill is part of the solution. Look, both to craft a budget and actually to get to a debt ceiling solution the right way, we need to make changes in our mandatory spending programs. We need reforms, and we need savings that are going to reduce the deficit and the debt. Farm Bill is a great example. We're writing a better Farm Bill, and we're going to save on the order of $30 billion, maybe more. That is exactly the kind of reforms we need to be making in government programs across the board to find real savings to reduce the deficit and the debt. So they actually come together, and I think that'll help us get the Farm Bill done by the end of the year.
Let's go to phone calls. Andrew's up first in Glen Allen, Arkansas. Independent caller. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, it's Glen Allen, Alaska.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't read it right. Go ahead.
My question is, John, with the food stamp program, are you guys going to be completely doing away with it, or for someone like my wife and I who are Alaskan Native and really depend on the state Medicaid for health care and for food stamp, because both my wife and I are disabled, I'm wondering, are you guys going to completely do away with it as time goes on?
Andrew, no, we're not. I mean, we continue the program, and I hope we make it stronger and better so that folks that need the help get it, and so that we make sure that there isn't waste, fraud, or abuse in the program. So I think for people that need the program, you can be comfortable that it is going to continue.
Shana Letter tweets in this: Farm Bill is welfare for corporate farms, wants working poor to starve.
No. I absolutely disagree. Look, in this country, we have the highest quality, lowest cost food in the world, in the history of the world. Every single American benefits from that, meaning every single American benefits from good farm policy. Highest quality, lowest cost for every single American and beyond. Agriculture supports 16 million jobs across this country, creates a favorable balance of trade. It's about food, fuel, and fiber. It's a very good deal for the American people.
How many farmers do you represent? How many corporate farms do you represent in North Dakota?
In North Dakota, we don't have corporate farming.
You don't? So how many farmers?
Probably 30,000, but again, there's a big difference between farming and then hobby farming. But the last numbers I saw in our state were on the order of 30,000.
What have you heard from them about the impasse over this farm bill?
They were on a farm. Look, we're working to get a long-term farm bill, 5-year farm bill. Farmers and ranchers are like any other business people. They have to be able to plan for the future. You want to get this economy going. You want to create more jobs. You want to help reduce the deficit and the debt with economic growth. I mean, that's the way to do it. Not raising taxes. Get the economy going. Get it growing. And one of the best ways to do that is to reduce uncertainty. You do that by creating a long-term farm bill. And the ag sector, as I say, a very dynamic, powerful sector. Food, fuel, and energy.
Billie Jean, Cleveland, Mississippi, Republican caller.
Senator John.
Yes.
How do you keep from having so much fraud? I know someone that has a full-time job and they just lie on their application and get food stamps.
So this is exactly one of the things that we're working on in the Farm Bill and trying to reform the food stamp program so that somebody that shouldn't be getting assistance doesn't get that. And look, Americans are very generous, wonderful, generous people. They want people who need help to get the help, but they don't want people to abuse these programs. And that's true whether it's the food stamp program, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or anything else that we do. So that is exactly what we're trying to do in the reforms that we're making.
Pat in Hooksett, New Hampshire, Democratic caller.
Yes, John, I have a question for you. I recently came up for renewal on my food stamps. Now I'm a disabled senior citizen, and I was denied most of my food stamp benefits that I get. My income is $900 a month. I've always worked hard. I'm on Social Security. And my food stamp benefit went from $86 a month, which is $20-something a week, which helped me buy nutritional foods. They've cut it down to $15 a month. Now, I'm disabled. Am I supposed to go get a job in the system? I don't think so, sir.
Pat, based on what you've told me, I don't understand why it would have been reduced. And so I'd encourage you to either contact, I would say contact your representative or senators from your state. I'm sure they can help you work with USDA and see what's going on there. But based on what you've described, I don't understand why it would be reduced.
Because if you were disabled, you wouldn't be disqualified from the
right,
program?
unless you had substantial income or something like that that disqualified you. But based on what Pat described there, I don't understand why there'd be a reduction, and she should certainly ask for help to address it.
Tina in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, independent caller.
Hi.
Oh.
I'm calling about the food stamp program. The $40 billion in cuts that are being proposed, what length of time? Is that over like 5 or 10 years? Or is that like right away?
It's actually scored over 10 years, and remember the Farm Bill is only a 5-year bill, so it's actually only $20 billion, and that's over 5 years. So you know you're talking about $4 billion a year, and remember that's out of $80 billion. So it's a small reduction, and again that's what we have to. That's the House proposal, and we'll negotiate something, but just that puts it in perspective for you.
Well, also I was thinking when you're talking about. Well, I'm talking about the Mr. Cantor plan of putting people back to work, basically a welfare to work program. I don't see a problem with putting people back to work that are able-bodied and can work. I don't see a problem with that, and I don't see a problem with those cuts over that length of time. I mean, some Democrats say people are going to starve. It's like nobody's going to starve when you have cuts that go over 10 years. You know, you might see a reduction in your food stamps, but there's also charities, there's food pantries, and certainly families band together. Nobody's going to starve. So, you know, that's all. Thank you.
Well, and just to follow up on that, remember the objective is to make sure people who need the help get it, but at the same time create the right incentives to encourage people to get work or to get trained or to get educated so that they can work. But there are exceptions built in there. If you have dependents or if you're elderly or if there are reasons you can't work or something like that, then there are exceptions to provide for that. So again, the effort is to make sure those who need help get the help, but create the right incentives to encourage people to be self-sufficient.
There's a story on Mother Jones' website this week. Welfare reform is leaving more in deep poverty. A new report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities looks at cash benefits provided under the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, the TAMP program, welfare. It finds that the value of monthly cash benefits that make up the fragile safety net for poor families, according to Mother Jones, with children, has continued to decline steadily since the program was reformed in 1996. Back then, benefits weren't exactly generous, but they did manage to keep a whole lot of kids out of real deep poverty. Today, those benefits are almost non-existent. When you get a caller like the last one who's talking about what Majority Leader Eric Cantor wants to do, are you concerned that it could go too far?
Well, understand TANF and SNAP.
Two different things.
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Payment, which is food stamp, two different programs. But again, remember, the Welfare to Work program or development within TANF was again designed to try to help people or encourage people to get trained, get educated, get a job, and that's what Americans want. But the reforms at the same time are still designed to ensure that those folks who need help get the help. That's exactly what we're trying to do in food stamps. And I'd have to go look, but I believe that if you look at the underlying numbers in TANF, the amount that's provided has continued to grow. Now, there is discussion about, you know, certainly the Obama administration wanted to eliminate some of those work requirements, but I really think that the American people want to have a reasonable work requirement in there to create the right incentive, while ensuring that people who need help get it.
Tina's next in, excuse me, Charles in Nashville, Tennessee, Republican caller. Hi, Charles.
This is exactly on subject, but my first comment has nothing to do with what I called for. It's just to respond to a couple of comments. In my work, I see a lot of people from 49 and a half and over that are mentally ill, and they rely solely, and also, you know, old, handicapped, retired, and they rely on their monthly income. And when you've done the sequester, what you've done was put blinders on. The people that you're telling to contact their whomever, it's not going to help. I mean, the blinders, it's real simple. You're going to get this much regardless to where you're at. Now, that being said, let's go to why I wanted to call. When you do the math, as far as the debt that we're in and the money that you're taking from the poor, okay, I mean specifically the poor and retired, the old people, it really doesn't add up. When you look at the way that the stock market fell, they didn't do that. When you look at the fraud and abuse that the government uses themselves to pad their own pockets, the poor didn't do that. Rather than take from the people that can't or don't have a voice, how about look at yourself? Look at the people that you're helping. Look at the pockets that you're filling. And just ask yourself, is it morally acceptable for you to take from the people that don't have it and continue giving to the ones that damn sure don't need it? I mean, these all giveaways you got, there's not jobs created. NAFTA killed all that. Let's stop pretending that these people can go get a job.
All right,
please.
We'll have the senator jump in, Charles.
Sure. You know, I welcome a chance to respond to that. First, in regard to sequestration, I agree that rather than making reductions across the board, we should be able to prioritize and do it in a way that really makes sense. And with the reforms that we're undertaking in the Farm Bill, that's exactly how we get to doing a budget so that we can prioritize rather than having reductions, as he says, sequester where it's just across the board. And you can make good decisions about, hey, where, you know, what are the priorities? Where do we need to make sure that we're expending our dollars, and where are areas that we can save or reform or reduce what we spend? So that's the whole reason we're working so hard to get a new Farm Bill where we make these reforms. Second, in the Farm Bill, 80% of the Farm Bill is nutrition. That means SNAP or food stamps. So something like 83% actually goes to help people who need the very help that the individual described. And the third point is, as I said, the amount that we provide in food stamps over the last 5 years has grown substantially to help people, particularly with, you know, the recession and the slow economy, to make sure they get the help they need. At the same time, the reforms that we're talking about making provide the right incentive in terms of encouraging people to get trained or to go back to work. And if somebody can't work, we provide specific exceptions, so then they would continue to be able to get food stamp assistance.
When you and your colleagues sit down today for negotiations, what will you be talking about today? What will we see happen?
Well, today we'll have our first meeting of the conferees. So the House and Senate conferees will get together for the first time now and really kind of go through our opening positions in terms of what we really want to prioritize in the Farm Bill, in the final product, and then we'll work from there to come together, get a compromise that we can take back to the House and the Senate floor for final votes. And I really do think that it is going to be part of a year-end budget, because we provide real reforms and real savings.
So do you think, when you say that, do you think it be incorporated into whatever the budget conferees are doing?
I think if you watch the budget conferees, they will already start talking about the savings that we're going to provide in our conference with the new Farm Bill.
Well, our viewers will be able to watch both. We're covering the budget conferees this morning at 10 a.m. and we're covering the Farm Bill conferees this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Both are viewable on our website, cspan.org, and go there to find out when they might air as well on our networks.
Good.
Give our viewers the background, though, on the conferees coming together today for the first time. What has been the holdup?
You know, I'm pleased we're coming together. I've really been working to get this done. You know, we've passed, I think, a strong bill in the Senate. The House, as you indicated earlier, actually passed their bill in two steps. They passed the Farm Bill with the various farm programs, conservation programs, so forth, and then they passed a separate food stamps bill. But now we've got both of them in committee. So it took them a little longer, and then they had to name their conferees, which they just did week before last. So now we're coming together for the first time. And I think the push is on to really get this done before year end. And I think it does dovetail with what we've been talking about, and that's what the work the Budget Committee is doing as well. So this is something I've been pushing pretty hard, not just for the last year, but actually for the last 2 years, to get us into conference, to get the two versions reconciled between the House and Senate, and get this a long-term farm bill done. Right now, we're operating on a one-year extension. We need to get a long-term bill in place.
Nick is up next. Columbia, Maryland, Democratic caller. Hey, Nick.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
Morning.
Morning, Nick.
I think we're approaching the cuts in the farm bill the wrong way. You know, I think we could have looked before cutting any money out how we could be more efficient at it. You know, anytime you see somebody in the grocery store using their food stamps, they're buying Fritos and junk. You know, when they could be buying, you know, lettuce and things that were healthier for them and more nourishing.
Well, you know, I certainly understand that. And again, we're trying to provide a program that does provide the right incentives. So I think actually you're talking about some of the things that you know, we're trying to do in a sensible way.
So in these reforms, there could be policy changes as to what you can buy with the food stamps?
You know, we really have focused more on some of the more fundamental requirements in terms of work and education and abuse as far as some of the state match programs. But, you know, all of those things go into getting, I guess, the most common sense program is the way I would describe it, that creates the right incentives.
We'll go to theater next. In Nebraska, Broken Bow, Nebraska, independent caller.
Yes, I'm calling about the working class people. That the politicians and the corporations, since before Ronald Reagan, were wiping out the unions just as fast as they could to keep the wages down to nothing. Then Ronald Reagan came up with amnesty, and then Clinton came up with sending the factories overseas, and now Mr. Obama wants to bring in the immigration reform and spend more money. You know, every year we probably spend more money on the people that are here illegally than we do on Obamacare. But and then one thing, you know, they keep talking about reforming Social Security, and what all they need to do, the way my politicians tell me, like Ben Nelson, was take the cap off Social Security and take care of it. But I guess that would take care of you know, the wealthy people during the Mr. Bush administration got all of those billions of dollars in tax breaks, you know. And
Senator Hoeven?
Well, he covered a lot of ground there. I'm not sure where to start other than, you know, we're in a situation now where we do have to reform our mandatory spending programs. That comprises 2/3 of our budget. And, you know, we have a deficit, and we have a $17 trillion debt. And, you know, we have got to find or undertake reforms that generate real savings so that we not only protect and preserve programs like Social Security and Medicare, but that at the same time we get a grip on our deficit and our debt so that those programs are there for future generations. And we also have to get the economy growing. And that's why we need these reforms. We need to get them in place, create certainty, get that economy going. And then the combination of the savings that we generate and economic growth is what addresses the deficit and the debt. And I believe we can do that in a way where people benefit because we create the right incentives in these programs. He talked about a lot of different things, but that's what we're working to do. That's what we should be working to do on behalf of the American people.
Explain one farm bill program, some might call it a subsidy, that you like, that you don't think should be touched or changed, and name one that you think should be overhauled.
Well, for example, we enhance crop insurance. I mean, we not only continue it, but we strengthen it. And, you know, again, that just makes sense. Every business person out there insures his or her business enterprise, right, in case of fire, in case of...
With taxpayer dollars?
Well, but understand that in the Farm Bill, you pay a premium, okay? So, I mean, you know, there's some help and some support there, but they all have to pay a premium just as, you know, other businesses would or do. And we're reforming that program, so formerly when farmers or ranchers got any kind of direct payment, we're eliminating all those. So we're actually reducing or eliminating the direct subsidy in terms of the farm program. That's the kind of reforms we're undertaking to make this, I think, a more cost-effective program, and as I say, saving on the order of $30 billion for the taxpayer. And again, back to my earlier point, every single American benefits from the lowest cost food supply in the world, highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world.
Any farm program that's getting overhauled or completely eliminated?
Oh yeah, like I say, we're completely eliminating direct payments, and there's other, and that's a you know, one that people have talked about for years as a subsidy they want to get rid of. We completely get rid of it. So, and there's others as well.
Jerry, Lady Lake, Florida, Republican caller.
Hello, Senator.
Morning.
My name is Jerry. I grew up in Pheasanton and attended UND.
Great.
And I'd like to add that your representative in Western North Dakota is absolutely awesome. What a great, helpful person. Sir, my question is, how does partisan politics play in voting on the Farm Bill? If 83% is focused on food stamp program, how can anybody vote against it? And how do you see partisan politics playing in voting on the Farm Bill?
You know, historically, again, thanks for calling in. And historically, the Farm Bill has not been a partisan politics. It's been a little bit more in terms of, you know, the division's been a little bit more urban, rural, if you will, because, you know, people that come from more rural states like I do really understand ag and that kind of thing. But the caller makes such a great point. 80% of the program is nutrition programs, school lunches, food stamps, as we've been talking about, which are incredibly beneficial and important to urban areas. So I think if people understand how the Farm Bill works and understand the value that the farmers and ranchers bring, you know, again, I think that's why we will be successful and why we've been able to get support for the Farm Bill. But historically, it hasn't broken down in terms of Republican and Democrat. It's been a little more rural, urban.
Let me go back to the food stamp numbers and just remind viewers, or if those are just tuning in, didn't hear, but the House bill cuts by $40 billion, the Senate by $4 billion. Mother Jones also on their website has this. The House proposal now being negotiated along with smaller yet still significant Senate cuts of $4 billion would result in 3.8 million people being removed from food stamps in 2014, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Do you agree with that number?
No, I don't agree with the number. And again, let's put this in perspective. You're talking about $40 billion, which is a congressional budget score over 10 years. The actual Farm Bill is 5 years. So now you're talking $20 billion. Then you divide that by the 5 years, you're talking $4 billion a year out of $80 billion a year in food stamps. It is a very, very small reduction. And we're still going to end up probably with some kind of compromise between the House number and the Senate number. So I certainly don't agree with their number. And as I've said earlier, I think we're really reforming the program in a way that encourages work and encourages education, but makes sure people that need help get it.
We'll be talking, by the way, tomorrow with Mother Jones. Reporters and writers here in Washington will be live from their D.C. bureau. The safety net programs will be one of our topics with one of their reporters, and we'll talk about news of the day as well. So tomorrow on the Washington Journal, Mother Jones Magazine. Let's go to Ron next for Senator Hoeven in Louisiana. Independent caller. Hi, Ron.
Hi. Good morning, Senator. It's nice to speak with you. I had a question concerning the guaranteed insurance payment or percentage that goes to insurance companies that operate under this Farm Bill. There was a plan put forth by a Democrat to reduce the guarantee and use that savings to put forward towards some of the reduction that would take place in the food stamp program. Could you speak to that issue?
Yeah, that's been reduced significantly. I think something like $6 billion just over recent years. So that has been reduced tremendously. There are some you know, specific things that apply to federal multi-peril crop insurance, such as weather and things like that, that are a little different than other insurance products. But what you're talking about has taken place, and there have been significant reductions in the assistance that insurance companies get to underwrite the farm insurance.
Here's a tweet from a viewer who says the value of the farm bill is $3.95 a gallon of milk and $4 gallon of gas. I think what they're trying to say is that there's a value to the farm bill in keeping prices lower for milk.
Oh, yes.
And for gas.
No question about it. Look at the ag industry. We have hundreds of thousands, millions of farmers across this country, farmers and ranchers, that compete to provide all of these food products, and they provide an array and a quality level of food that is historic in the world. Now, look at many other industries where you have concentrations of just a few big companies. How would you like to have just a few big corporations doing all the farming in this country? I don't think people would like that very much. Tremendous value that our farmers and ranchers provide.
And we'll come back to this conversation. I just want to put it on pause for a second because Kathleen Sebelius, the head of HHS, has just entered the room over on the House side for testimony before the House Energy and Commerce Committee. For our viewers who are interested in watching this, we will have live coverage from beginning to end on C-SPAN 3 this morning, and then we will re-air her testimony this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. The amount of people in that room for her testimony is significant. A lot of photographers there, a lot of cameras. You saw her going through the members up there shaking hands. If you were sitting there today and you get to ask her a question, what would it be?
Well, the first question I'd ask is, what happened with the website? Did you know that it wasn't going to work? And if so, why did you not say something and so that, you know, we could delay it? And if you didn't know, why didn't you know? And I think that's a very important question because that's just step one when it comes to Obamacare, and probably the easiest step. And if you can't even deliver a website up front and tell people what's going on with it, how in the world are you going to deliver this government-run healthcare approach, which, again, I think is the wrong approach. I think we should get rid of it and get an approach where we empower people to choose their own health insurance and their own health care providers.
If she does not take responsibility, should she be then held accountable? Should she resign?
I think she definitely has to be held accountable, and as to whether she stays or not, that's a decision that President Obama makes. That's his choice to make, but absolutely she has to be accountable. Look at the impact that Obamacare has on the people of this great country. It affects everyone. So absolutely. Because we all have health care, right? And so it affects what health care we get and how we get it. So it affects all of us. Of course she has to be accountable.
Well, the enrollment period the deadline is January. There's more time for people to sign up. If they can't get on right now, I mean, eventually, if they get these problems fixed, people will be able to get enrolled.
Will they? I mean, right now, they've got a real problem. That, in essence, that HHS is saying that you have to get enrolled, you know, in an insurance policy. You can't go on the website and get it, and look how many people are being canceled under their existing policies. That's a real problem. And whether or not they're going to get it straightened out, well, we haven't seen. She's going to answer those questions today. So back to your earlier question, does she have to be held accountable? Does the administration have to be held accountable? Absolutely. We elect him to be accountable. We elect people to be accountable on the policies they put forward for the American people.
Let me read the Washington Post editorial board on the cancellation of health care policies. Those lost health plans, they write. Under the new health care law, many dropped by insurance companies will be better off in the end. They write this: though some people might pay more than they did before, they and many others will also get more. Among other things, they will be less financially vulnerable when they get sick. In some cases, dramatically less. Their new plans will also put taxpayers at less risk of having to cover big medical bills when underinsured patients unexpectedly fall very ill. That goes too for people who currently decline to buy insurance but will have to next year.
who gets to decide? Who gets to make that decision? Does the federal government get to make that decision, or do you as an individual get to make that decision? So if I get canceled off my policy, or you get canceled off your policy, a policy that you picked, and you have to go to the exchange and get a different policy. Now, federal government, Secretary Sebelius, President Obama, they say, oh, well, you're better off. So they get to decide that, or do you get to decide that as an individual? And that's the point I'm making. I believe people want to make their own decisions about their health care insurance and their health care providers. So to have the federal government or anyone else come in and say, we can decide, Uncle Sam can decide better than you as an individual can decide whether or not you're better off, I don't agree with that. So let's take a 65-year-old man. Does he really need maternity care because the federal government decided that's what's got to be in his plan and he's going to pay more for it? I don't think so. So it comes down to a fundamental belief in whether you believe individuals should get to decide on their health care or whether the federal government's going to decide for them.
Well, those points and many more will be made happening right now over on C-SPAN 3, live coverage of the House Energy and Commerce Committee with testimony by HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius. You're hearing opening statements. They'll begin with those, and the Secretary will give hers, and then you can expect some Q&A that will last a while. We will re-air today's testimony at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on C-SPAN. Back to our conversation with the Senator about the Farm Bill negotiations. Clyde in Mississippi, Republican caller. Go ahead.
Good morning, Greta and Senator Hoeven. I've called in many, many times about the foreign policy, and it is wrong, wrong, wrong. In 1933, when it was given up by the states, and transferred to the federal government to make foreign policy, we had a Great Depression back 70, 80 years ago, and now we've got the greatest depression, and it's all linked to because of lack of farm income, and it's all tied together with this, this one size fits all. It's like the Obamacare and everything. The federal government's going to tell you what to do and how to farm, and going to subsidize. They're subsidizing overproduction. It's driving the small farms out of business, and it's going to drive the doctors, out of health care. And my question to you, Senator Hoeven, is when are we going to quit subsidizing the marketplace and start guarding and protecting the marketplace the way it was done? It was, the states gave up their power in 1933 for the federal government to regulate the marketplace, and that's all they're supposed to be doing in Washington, D.C., regulate the marketplace, and that's what you should be doing on health care and farming, is regulate the marketplace. And that's what they don't understand up there. You can't subsidize it. Let the market work it out. And I thank y'all, and Lord bless you.
All right, Clyde.
I think Clyde makes a good point in this sense. We're trying to do exactly what he's talking about. We eliminate direct payments under what's called the farm program, and really instead try to shift over and create a stronger insurance program so that farmers, ranchers can purchase insurance that works similar to what other businesses do. So we're actually trying to do just what he said, that's eliminate the direct subsidies and get to more of a market-based approach.
John, you're up next. Glenview, Illinois, Democratic caller.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
I have two questions. One of them was about the Farm Bill, which is what I had called in about. But let me ask one thing first that you had brought up with the health plan, because you brought this thing. You're talking about how can the government, how are they going to be able to handle these exchanges, et cetera. But I asked the readers to please go look this, the listeners, to please go look this up. Recently, Ryan put forth a plan that I believe you voted for that would take almost all the seniors that are on a single-payer system, about 50 million seniors, and would put them on, give them vouchers, a certain amount to pay, and they would go to exchanges just like this to sign up for private health insurance one at a time. And that's 50 million people. It would be virtually identical to this. Please go look it up. And if you don't think that 5 million people that the government can handle, which is I think what they're hoping to get this first year, how can you vote for something where Ryan wants 50 million seniors to individually sign up through exchanges? That's right. one
Well,
question.
that's a good question.
The second one is On the Farm Bill, I noticed that when you brought up the example of insurance, you mentioned, like any manufacturer or other business would do. And the moderator pointed out how they don't get tax subsidies for that, though. We don't subsidize that. And you pointed out that they have to pay premiums, but it's still subsidized premiums. And I think a lot of the public is tired of subsidizing profitable industries, period. They want it stopped.
Sure. Both good questions. First, in terms of the health care, there's a difference between offering an option to go to an exchange and requiring that you have, everyone has to go through the exchanges. So it's a difference between offering people choices and options and setting up a program that everybody has to abide by. And so that's the difference, I think, between some of the proposals that various Republicans have put forward and essentially Obamacare, where you've got a government-run health care plan that everybody has to follow. That's what I see, one of the biggest differences there. In regard to your second question, that's exactly why we are reducing the subsidies under the farm program and trying to make it more like other programs. For example, in manufacturing, which you brought up, there are various tax incentives that manufacturers get. Those are the kind of things that are designed to try to create incentives to encourage not only economic growth, but job creation. That's exactly the kind of approach we're moving towards in the Farm Bill.
Sheila in Oklahoma, independent caller.
Yeah, I just had a comment on the food stamp program. Just wondering if it's going to get any worse than what it is, because as of November 1st, I have a family of 4, and our income is around $1,600 a month, and we're being cut down to $195 a month. Just wondering if it's going to get any worse or if it's going to get any better.
Look, I certainly understand your concern. In the program, we try to make sure that if you have dependents and you need the help, you get the help. I mean, that's the whole idea in terms of the program. So for folks who may be disabled and can't work, for somebody who has dependents and needs the help, we're trying to make sure that program is there for them. And I think you'll see that's the case, that we actually deliver that kind of program. And again, if you look at food stamps and what this country provides in nutrition support, it is growing, not going down.
Sheila, you still there?
4 or 05, I was working full time, and my husband was on unemployment, and we got, $2,000 or over $2,000 a month income, and food stamps like $500. And now that I really, really need it, I mean, I'm being cut down to less than $200 a month. And it's hard. I mean, by the time I pay just my normal bills, electric, gas, water, I might have $50 left for the whole month. We're on a disability, me and my husband. And, I mean, it's hard to come up with that extra money to go with feeding 2 growing kids. I'm just wondering if it's crazy.
I think you'll find that the support for food stamps is there and will continue. Now, you may qualify for other types of assistance depending on your circumstances, but in terms of food stamps and the situation you described, that food stamp assistance will continue.
One last phone call here for you, Senator. John in Elbow Lake, Minnesota, Republican caller.
Hi, good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
My question has been with the technology that we have for like scanning at grocery stores and such. Has there been discussions, for the sake of nutrition and savings, about using that technology to weed out certain products from running through the tills on this program?
Yes, there is, and obviously that makes sense. Now, I'm one that really tries to guard, individuals' rights and privacy and that kind of thing. So I'm very careful about that kind of thing. But it is a public program, and the taxpayer provides it. So we've got to make sure that there are reasonable common sense rules that ensure that there aren't abuses. And so that is, something that we have to work on and are working on in terms of the food stamp program and the reforms that we make.
Senator Hoeven will be gathering with his other conferees on this farm bill later this afternoon to hash out their differences, and we will have coverage on cspan.org for those that are interested. Senator, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Greta. Good to be with you.
And those Farm Bill conferees are meeting this afternoon. In about an hour, we will have live coverage of that conference committee at 2:30 Eastern. That will be over on C-SPAN 3. Live look at the floor of the U.S. Senate, where earlier today they confirmed the nomination of Alan Estevez to be Principal Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and they also voted to invoke cloture on the nomination of Katherine Archuleta to be the Director of Office of Personnel Management. So some debate ahead on her nomination. And the quorum call continues on the Senate floor. We're going to take you to part of another conference committee that met today, the Budget Conference Committee, their first meeting to iron out differences between the House and Senate. Paul Ryan, the chairman, announcing their next meeting will be Wednesday, November the 13th. But here's a look at their deliberations earlier today.
You'll notice that there are 3 senators for every congressman, so as we see it, that's an even match. I like to think that quality beats quantity, but all in jest. In all seriousness, we've got our work cut out for us. It's not going to be easy. So today I'd like to talk about why we're here and what we need to do. We're here because we want to get an agreement. We have a budget conference. We want regular order. We want to make things work. We want government to work. We want to get something done. For too long, both parties have ignored our growing national debt and the threat it poses to our country. Democrats didn't create all these problems, neither did Republicans. Everybody was part of the problem. So everybody has to be part of the solution. But you've got to make an accurate diagnosis before you can fill out a prescription. We've got to recognize what we're dealing with. And I don't know if the AV is ready yet. It's not, I take it. We have an AV problem, so I'm going to just verbalize this. The debt held by the public has doubled in just the last 5 years. It's only getting worse. 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. Health care costs are rising. Medicare and Social Security, 2 incredibly important programs, they're going broke. The Congressional Budget Office says that if we don't act, we will have a debt crisis. And if that happens, the most vulnerable will be suffering the first and the worst. This debt, it weighs down our economy right now, today. It is a drag on economic growth and job creation today. But right now, we're not doing much about it. We can't keep kicking the can down the road anymore. We've got to get a handle on our debt, and we've got to get a handle on it now. And from my perspective, simply taking more from the hardworking families of America just isn't the answer. I know my Republican colleagues feel the same. So I want to say this from the get-go. If we look at this conference as an argument about taxes, we're not going to get anywhere. The way to raise revenue, from our perspective, is to grow the economy, to get people back to work. We need to write a tax code that encourages economic growth, that doesn't stifle it. And luckily, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, well, guess what? They're working together to do just that. Today, our tax code is full of carve-outs and kickbacks. We need to get rid of them. And when those bipartisan talks, that's just the way to do it. So let's do all we can to encourage that effort. And let's focus our energy on the task at hand, a budget that cuts spending in a smarter way. Our goal isn't to grow the federal budget, it's to grow family budgets. And to do that, we need to get people back to work. We need to grow this economy. Over 90 million Americans, they're on the sidelines. Over a third of the unemployed in this country haven't had a job in over 6 months. Household income is down significantly. We may disagree over why the economy isn't growing as it should, but I hope we can agree that the status quo is just not acceptable. So let's work together to provide some real relief for families. If we get control of our debt, we will help grow the economy. We'll restore confidence in Washington. The bar is pretty low right now. Let's see if we can clear it. And we'll restore confidence in our economy if we do that. Today, the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates unusually low. If we lock in some structural reforms now, we will help keep interest rates low, which will help our economy. This opportunity is not going to last forever. Once interest rates rise, debt payments will eat up a bigger slice of the federal budget. We already know that the Fed is going to start tapering next year sometime. That means interest rates will rise. In fact, if we keep kicking this can down the road, those payments might grow so large that they bankrupt us. Structural reforms are crucial to economic growth, and we should act now to get a down payment on this problem. Nobody has to abandon their principles here. Instead, what we ought to do is find where our principles overlap to find common ground. We all agree that Washington
Madam
isn't
President, this afternoon, the 2013 Farm Bill Conference Committee will finally convene for the first time.